Next issue we have to contend with is public perception. As Phil has identified already this morning, and we've had a number of other people talk about, this is what people think about UASs. A weapons platform that's going out there to wipe every house in Brisbane inner city area off the map. Not quite sure why, but that's what Hollywood depicts. They also have a huge concern about privacy issues. Surveillance in particular, a recent communique from AUVSI suggesting by a senator in the US, the first person that shoots down a surveillance UAS could be acclaimed as a hero. We've got to overcome that perception. We've got to go out and safely operate. We've got to go out and prove the community benefit for operating UASs. We also have to overcome bureaucratic strangleholds. Cyclone Katrina was a classic example. MQ-1 Predators and MQ-9 Reapers were made available to do surveillance of the Cyclone Katrina area in New Orleans to identify where potential survivors were, where hazards were, to assist in the search and rescue effort. These aircraft were constrained to above 55,000 feet because of bureaucracy. There is anecdotal discussion about the ISR kit from some, not necessarily of these particular aircraft, but some aircraft being put onto manned rotary wing aircraft and flown in the same environment to do the same job. Why? Because we have a rule for men, we don't have a rule for UAS. In previous forums sponsored by AUVSA, we have heard about Alaska Marine Tracking, a UAS project to look at mammal wildlife, whales in particular, tracking through the north regions of Alaska. Prohibited by the FAA, even though not within any commercial airspace, not close to any civilian environments, simply because we don't have a rule to allow it. The Yamaha RMAX. Can't sell it to China. Why? Because we have a bureaucratic rule that says we can't sell it to China. No other reason but the rules there stop us from doing the business that we want to do. What we as a community have to do, though, is convince the regulators that we can do that, to prove that we do have acceptable and safe operation. But now it's an exciting time. Now, for the first time, the planets are starting to align. We here in Australia have a unique opportunity. Firstly, CASA Circular 101 was released in 1999. That had the conceptual direction for Australian national airspace to be offering operations of UAS. Then, the biggest change that we have seen in this country was regulator leadership. I first met John McCormack in my early days as a pilot. He also was a fighter combat instructor and taught me the skills of the trade. Right back in those days in 1980, I knew John as a very, very visionary person, looking far ahead into the future. And now I think he has found his forte. Sitting at the head of CASA, he now has the capacity to look further than any of us into the future and see how to take us there. Without his leadership, I think that our company in particular would have no point in moving down the UAS pathway. He needed two critical facilitators. Jim Coyne, the manager of Future Airspace, and Phil Presgrave, the unmanned system specialist, are experts in the field. But the one thing that I give them extreme acclamation for is their engagement of industry. I've had many discussions with Phil. I've had to beat him around the ears quite a few times about some of the concepts that he has had in regard to UAS. The advantage is that we both have an identical desire for the outcome. Phil paused this morning, and I think the pause was for my benefit. I've been advocating for quite some time to have restrictions for operations of UAS to be available below 400 feet in IMC. This morning we saw that that is now on the project goal. This is the advantage of us as an industry engaging with the regulator. We will see over time that we'll be able to move in the right pathway to have UAS fully integrated into the national airspace. The other thing that I would like to see, and that Phil seems to be moving along with, are soft proposals. Every UAS manufacturer builds a specific capability into their aircraft, many of which. simply documented in their procedural manuals. The users of those UASs have tasks. The tasks are generally a subset of those capabilities. One of our desires is to do aerial ag. There's no reason for the guy who's out there managing the crop dusting system to know about Class C airspace. Yet we may have a requirement to transit that aircraft back to Archerfield through controlled airspace. So how do we manage the task versus capability? Perhaps there's some trade-off in the regulatory system where we can require acknowledgement, certification based on task as a subset of the capability of the aircraft. We've got to look to the future to see how we can take the industry through the next 20 years. There also needs to be attribution to hardware, and this is going to be probably the biggest challenge for us as makers of UAS to prove to the regulator that we have a safe system. How do we go and verify all of the software that's built into our autopilot system? How do we verify that all of the deconflicting sense and avoid is actually going to do what it says? Somehow we've got to come to a co-joint direction with the regulator to satisfy the safety case over and above what the simple risk analysis is. The next one is a very, very important one. I first came to the UAS industry nearly 2 years ago and attended the conference session in Melbourne. The invitation was under the auspices of AUVSI, but it wasn't until I arrived there that I learned what AUVSA was. AUVSA is an organisation that has done a number of things. Firstly, it has provided an environment whereby academia, the regulator, industry itself, and research all have a conduit. And there's been one particular person that's provided that conduit. This particular person is one of the most astute people that I have met. The capacity to listen on a technological level or an abstract level and immediately engage that from any perspective of the four that I've just mentioned is a unique capability. The only person that I've met that has that capability is Peggy McTavish. Without her, I don't think this industry will be anywhere near as advanced as it is. She has provided a unique conduit for industry to move directly into aviation regulation and the direct conduit back out, and also the cross-pollinisation. I wouldn't have met the CSIRO delegates and the others that I have that I see where I'm going to take CoaX helicopters without Peggy McTavish. We're seeing other things happen in the world. The US Senate mandate to have the FAA accommodate UAS by 2014. To my mind, that's still dreamweaver. Where are we in Australia? We actually have the regulations there. We are the world leaders. Jim Coyne, sitting on the top of the ICAO UAS committee, is now disseminating the information that Phil, under the direction of JMAC, have put together. Chinese airspace, another example. Currently all maintained by military. It can take in excess of 1 month to get a simple flight plan to transit a civil aircraft through Chinese airspace because it's all managed by military. At CoaX Helicopters, we have already had requests for UAS to operate once the Chinese airspace becomes available. One company has asked us for 100 units to go and do pollution management in China. The demand for UAS is extremely high.